Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the High Bar Research Alliance, also known as the HRA. I'll be the moderator of today's one-hour event, and I'm joining you today from the University of British Columbia, where I support the development of research partnerships. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that the land on which UBC is situated is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, and we are very grateful to live and work together in such a beautiful place. So this is the 22nd webinar in this series for researchers, administrators, and others who are interested in what we call highly integrative, basic, and responsive research. Our previous webinars are all available for viewing on the HRA website, which can be found at highbar-research.org. And before our featured presentation today, I'll take a minute to explain the structure of today's event. We'll begin with a brief overview of the High Bar research concept from Dr. Lauren Whitehead, the director of the HRA. Next, Dr. Beth Rose Middleton and Joe Hostler will spend about 20 minutes speaking to the approach they're taking to explore concerns among tribal members that contaminants from nearby forestry and agriculture activities may be causing adverse health effects within the community. Then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A, followed by an opportunity for Beth Rose and Joe to wrap up with their final takeaways. So as you listen to the presentation today, please type any questions you have in the Q&A box that appears at the bottom of your screen. We would particularly appreciate any questions from our audience that'll help us further explore the connections to High Bar research in context of your ambitions to develop similar collaborations. And I think we're ready to get started. So to kick us off with an overview of the High Bar Research Alliance, please welcome Dr. Lauren Whitehead. Lauren is the director of the HRA, as well as UBC's special advisor on entrepreneurship, innovation, and research, and professor in our Department of Physics and Astronomy.
Great. Thanks very much, Kira. I'll be quite brief today, but as Kira has mentioned, I'll give a brief introduction to the idea of the High Bar Research Alliance and High Bar Research itself. So High Bar Research is an acronym standing for Highly Integrative, Basic, and Responsive. So we'll be discussing projects of that type and also the High Bar Research Alliance. High Bar Research projects are important because they embrace two key dualities. First, they integrate academic leadership with societal leadership. That's duality one. And that creates cognitive diversity that fuels successful innovation. The second duality is the integration of academic purpose with societal purpose for the research project in question. And that creates new knowledge while applying it to practical challenges. So those are four very interesting ideas. They belong together in High Bar Research. And they also help to explain the name. So those ideas are rather diverse, as you can see, just looking at them. Bringing them together makes High Bar Research highly integrative. And it's also, as I mentioned before, basic and responsive. It's work that creates new knowledge and also solves problems. So at the intersection of those four ideas and all of those thoughts is our High Bar Research projects. Why do we care about that? Because of a very important, simple, single idea. High Bar projects, High Bar Research projects are very impactful. Now, just a few words about the High Bar Research Alliance itself and its mission. The HRA is a distributed, organized network of experienced volunteers who are united in their support of High Bar Research projects. We aim to increase the rate of High Bar Research projects from about 1 in 20 at universities starting in 2020 when we began to about 1 in 5 by 2030, while improving all kinds of research. This will help universities respond more effectively to societal needs while increasing the overall excellence of their research portfolios. Achieving our goal does require some adjustments in academic culture, and there are many ways that can be achieved and are being achieved. Now, it's a real pleasure to be introducing today's webinar, which is very relevant to everything I've just said. Joe Hostler and Beth Rose Middleton will describe their design and implementation of an innovative, collaborative research program to better assess possible personal exposure to environmental contamination. I'm very, very interested in this idea. First of all, it's just fascinating. But secondly, it does integrate the ideas of both academic and community leadership, and also involves discovery of new knowledge and addressing societal problems. So it's just a beautiful example of a high bar research project. So on that note, Kira, it's my great pleasure to hand back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lauren. And now I'm really pleased to introduce today's presenters. So please welcome Dr. Beth Rose Middleton, a professor of Native American Studies at UC Davis, whose research centers on environmental policy and conservation. Dr. Middleton also explores questions on climate justice, land stewardship, and intergenerational trauma and healing. And also joining us today is Joe Hostler. He's an environmental scientist with the Yurok Tribe's Environmental Department. And Joe's an Indigenous scientist who utilizes both Western science and traditional ecological knowledge to help protect the health of his community and their environment. So over to you, Beth Rose and Joe.
Thank you so much for that kind intro. It's an honor to present here with Joe and to talk with this group.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. Ayukui and Nikna Joe Hostler. I'm pleased to present with my good friend Beth Rose and happy to be here. Familiarize yourself with where Yurok is. We're the largest tribe in California. So we are up in the northwest corner, up in the Redwood Forest. The Yurok people have resided along the lower 48 miles or so of the Klamath River and along the coast, about 50 or so miles of the California coastline and the beautiful Redwood Forest. We been here for thousands of years, but in about 1855, I think we had our reservation was made by executive order. We retained those lands. We've lost some of our connection to the coastal people, but downriver we call ourselves Pulikla. As Yurok is actually a upriver tribe's word for our people, but we call ourselves Pulikla, and Nur is coastal Yurok. But we are it's very rural, so we subsistence fishermen, hunters, gatherers, we're world-renowned basket weavers. Very rural. The population, I can't even think what the reservation population is, under 10,000. I can't remember how many people live on the reservation, but a lot of the people live in adjoining communities. And so, but just to familiarize yourself where we are, we're in the lower 47 miles of Klamath River. And if you may have heard, just real quickly, been for 20 plus years, we've been trying to remove very large hydroelectric dams on our river. And so right now, as we speak, the dams are actually coming down, and it's part of one of the world's largest dam decommissionings occurring right now. So 20-something years ago, we started the process, and advocacy and many people contributed to it, and now it's coming to fruit. So gonna have a free-flowing Klamath River again for the first time in probably 100, well, it'll be 100 years, yeah. So generations of our ancestors, of our elders now have been fighting for this, and now it's coming together, an exciting time for us. And then background, just real quick, I work for the environmental department. We recently, some of these slides sometimes we renamed ourselves. We were a program and now we're a department. And so some of these slides may or may not relate to YTEP instead of YTED, but either way. But yeah, I work for environmental health department. And so our department started like 20 plus years ago, and we have a number of research projects, and I stepped into this role. I've known Beth Rose for a number of years, but this project I'm fairly new to. About the last year and a half, I've contributed to it. But prior to that, my predecessor, Dr. Suzanne Fuhardy, worked on it with Beth Rose, and then Christine, my assistant, who you can see in the picture. Beth Rose came up to our Salmon Fest. It's one of our public gatherings where many of the tribal members come back to our reservation. It's public, kind of like a street fair type thing, but we have a number of activities and stuff for that day. And we had some outreach activities that day, and the photo is from that. But we all of our research projects are community based, so we always ask our community what they want, how they want it. We have advisory committees that we consult with. We have an elders committee that we regularly consult with, and we have a natural resource committee that's our tribal government. We're sovereign nations, so we have our own tribal leadership. And so tribal council, our leadership, appoints a certain number of knowledgeable tribal members in various committees to be advisory committees. And so one of which is Natural Resource Committee, and we've gone to them for guidance many times in this project. And so, as I mentioned before, we're always presenting back to our community and outreach at community meetings. We often have many public meetings. COVID, that kind of became, all of us had a difficult time reaching our people during COVID. We had a lot of Zoom things. We had a lot of, but anyway, yeah, I guess I will move on and let Beth Rose.
Thank you. This is such a wonderful project, and I think I want to kind of give a little context here about environmental injustice, and this is an environmental justice project, and how this project came to be collaboratively. So you'll probably are familiar with environmental justice, fair treatment, meaningful involvement, especially regarding environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And there's the procedural and the distributive aspect, so that there should be equal distribution of benefits and harms, and equal opportunity to participate in environmental decision making that affects people's health. Indigenous environmental justice is distinct, as it's attentive to this long history of settler colonialism, theft of land, settler pollution of land, as a broader definition of environmental injustice. And part of that injustice is contamination. So the projects that we're talking with are trying to address this history of Indigenous environmental justice and rural environmental justice. As Joe mentioned, this is a really remote area. People are spread out on a large landscape and also live directly from and with that landscape. So there are direct pathways of exposure that are different from exposure pathways that affect urban populations. And these are culturally specific exposure pathways. So people are in the water, people are running basket materials through their mouths, people are fishing and hunting locally. So directly exposed if they're spraying, and there has been spraying for herbicides, for example, for forest management projects. If there's impact from illegal marijuana grows, if there's pesticides, insecticides, herbicides from upstream agriculture, these are directly affecting tribal members. So that's our focus in terms of environmental injustice. Joe, you might want to talk about this a little bit, because it really comes from the UROC's cleanup standards for contaminated property. So I'll pass that to you.
I don't normally work. I'm getting up to speed on this project also. So the background stuff, Beth Rose worked with has partly is to give my hats off to Beth Rose, because she's been a great partner to us for many years. So we've worked on many research projects. This is one of many that we collaborated together on. And so trying to make sure I have the right project in mind. But yeah, our exposures are as Beth Rose mentioned, we have different exposures to Indigenous people because we're intimately connected to our lands every day. So we're on the river almost every day. We're out in the forest every day. And we subside off our traditional foods the way that we have for thousands of years, for the most part. I mean, not as much as we used to per se, but almost everybody eats fish or deer or sturgeon. We have a number of fish that we eat beyond salmon, but we have everybody eats those many times a week, and so our exposures are different. And then also being out in the environment and being out there all the time, all the different seasonalities. Our ceremonies were, a land-based culture, so our ceremonies are outdoors as well. And so beyond our, exposures, we also have our mental connections to our environments. And so having a healthy environment affects our mental health as well. And so, as mentioned, from our cleanup standards, which I didn't work on much on before, but they're really great. I mean, we're often funded by EPA, US EPA grants, and so a lot of our processes and protocols and ordinances somewhat go along that line, along US EPA guidelines. But we have higher standards than the federal and the state agencies as well, because we live in these lands, and we've been here for thousands of years, and we hope to be here for thousands of years more. So we're very stringent and very cognizant of all these impacts, and we patrol them and try to enforce and utilize our sovereignty to protect ourselves.
It's just wonderful for us working with Yurok tribe. I think the strength of these standards is very significant. And one thing that has been a frustration to me working in this space is that some of the state standards, they don't necessarily take into account this type of exposure and this type of relationship to the environment. So that allows for contaminants to be in the water and still meet state standards, but still be affecting people's health. So that's, where I think our work is really important. The project, as Joe mentioned, there's a couple projects here, and the wristband project that we're focused on today directly builds off of the Superfund Research Program collaboration. So Superfund Research Program doesn't deal specifically with Superfund sites per se, but more with contaminants in the environment, man-made contaminants that are affecting human health and that may not yet be identified. So this project was led by Dr. Bruce Hammack as the lead PI, and we began in 2017. And we looked at the Klamath and tributaries, water samples and analysis, as well as sediments at old timber processing sites. And we were specifically interested in contaminants from illegal marijuana grows, which had been a significant issue within Yurok homelands. And those who were growing were leaving buckets and unmarked containers of chemicals that were going directly into the waterways where people were getting their water directly for household use. So that was our purpose with the Superfund. And the analysis is still ongoing. These are just some examples of sites. You can see some of the old timber infrastructure on the landscape, some of the old mill ponds. I emphasized the illegal marijuana grows in the last slide, but the timber companies and the spraying of herbicides for timber management also had a significant impact on tribal members' health. And in addition to spraying, there were certain mill processing or lumber processing areas like this old mill pond that were also upstream from where people were living and fishing and hunting. I don't know if you'd like to add anything about this, Joe.
Yeah, just to explain, and our reservation, like many reservations, indigenous communities have a really complex land tenure. So we have the checkerboard we call, where on the landscape, the government, squares up our properties, and so one piece of property may be owned by the tribe, and next door may not be owned by the tribe, and so it makes really difficult land decisions. And so historically we had much of our land was lost throughout time, and private timber companies acquired much of our lands. And so even though we lived on a reservation and that was legally supposed to be our land, the timber companies were the actual landowners of much of our land base. And so they would manage their lands in the way that we necessarily didn't approve, but they were the landowners, and so they had leeway to go and manage clear cut timber, aerial herbicide sprayings. Many child members have, generational memories of, grandma, grandpa being sprayed by, helicopters coming through and spraying people, and everybody, had, purple or blue, whatever day that color was, sprayed on them. And then, we have so many, and then from that, people have memories of, cancer spikes, of all these, birth defects, reproductive problems, miscarriages, all these negative outcomes and stuff. And so in the community, we have this memory of all these, negative exposures. And so what we've been trying to do is tease out, exposure to reality, or, perception, reality. But yeah, just as background of this. And so it's a significant concern for our people, because these are legacy sites, things that we just live with every day, and you kind of get used to them and forget that it's there. But these sites are maybe it's not broad, acres and acres and acres of contamination, but it might be a hot spot that's like right in a waterway that feeds someone's drinking water that they're drinking every day. And so, as I mentioned, it's really rural, and luckily we're pretty pristine waters for the most part. So traditionally, a lot of people would just get, we have a lot of creeks, and so people would just take a pipe or a hose out of the creek and get their water, and it was just like, perfectly clean water. And so those times are changing now, but that's how we get exposure in our drinking water, and that's another one of our different one of our studies, I guess. So
Yes, thank you, Joe. So as part of the Superfund project, we collectively attended the National Superfund Research conferences annually. So there'd be both UC Davis and Yurok Tribe Environmental Department representatives who would go and listen to different presentations that dealt with contaminants and health impacts, and identifying contaminants and their impacts. And one of the presenters talked about a wristband project that was happening between Oregon State University and a nation in Washington. And the Yurok tribe members who attended, the staff who attended, suggested that this be the next step in our project to look at individual levels of exposure and use the wristbands as passive sampling devices. And so luckily, one of the labs involved with the Superfund project also could do analysis for wristbands. So we developed this project. We've had a wonderful grad student researcher who is working on her doctorate in public health sciences. I wanted to highlight her here because she has been so central to this work in terms of developing project protocols, outreach materials. We meet regularly with Joe and his staff. She's also been doing the wristband analysis and developing the report back materials. So we've been really blessed to have her on staff. This is an example of the outreach materials for the wristband project. And I'll go through in a minute just the who participates in the project, but the goal is to understand the individual exposure. And Joe and his staff did a lot of the work and outreach to recruit participants for this project. We developed the project together, but then the piece of interacting with the community members, making sure their information is confidential, making sure the individual information on the wristbands and who they're linked to in the community stays at the tribe. That has really been under Yurok Tribe Environmental Department. So it's been, I think, a real strong collaboration. And I think I have a slide coming up with our overlap of activities in the study. So again, here our goal was to address people's concerns, as Joe mentioned, like memories of exposure and spraying, and thinking about what people are exposed to today, whether or not there's helicopters going overhead, but there are other types of exposure that are in the environment. People would like to know, what factors influence exposure. Is it certain times of year? Is it where they are on tribal lands? We are going to get individual reports of the contaminants found on each wristband to participating tribal members, and then aggregated information to the environmental department and the tribe. We had a questionnaire that participants who wore the wristband answered, reporting on kind of where they were and what they were doing generally while they were wearing the wristband. The participants were split into groups, those upriver and downriver. They were also, it was also by gender. So we had a roughly equal number of male and female participants, and it was seasonal. So people wore the wristband in 2 rounds, in winter and summer, to kind of capture different seasonal activities that may relate to different exposures. And the funding we received for this work from Environmental Health Science Center and the Cancer Center, both at UC Davis, aim to support us to collaboratively generate hypotheses for future research. So should certain contaminants or exposure patterns come up, what might we look into in the future? What would the tribal staff and members like us to focus on? And of course, this builds on our collaboration.
I was just gonna add with the passive. I remember discussing early on like how we should go about our protocols for sampling, and the passive sample really was intriguing because you didn't have to get like a blood draw or a specimen sample or anything like that. It was pretty easy. People just wore the wristband and forgot about it. People just just live their normal life and kind of forget that it's there. 7 days go by pretty fast. And then people had a kind of a journal of activities that they would do that day. It takes some teasing and some coaching to really get details in that, because we don't often think about, oh, what did I do today? And you forget all your little things that you do as you go through your day. And so take some coaching along with that. But that's really important to know what people were doing and where they were at that day. Because if you come up with, a chemical trace of something and it's like, whoa, where did this come from? And then we got to kind of go back in time and figure out where they were, what they were doing. And then as a sample design as well, within our communities, men and women have different roles and responsibilities in the community. So that was also vital in our design, and understanding that women and men may have different exposures by related to their roles in the community. And I think that was it. And then the last one, I'll check that later. There was one about our outreach stuff, because there's quite a bit to cover on our outreach stuff, because that's an integral part. And just and visualization and wording is really essential in working, especially with tribal communities, especially. So, Beth Rose?
No, I think it's great, actually, Joe, if you'd like to talk about the outreach piece. This slide talks about the study population. But all of the work to outreach to them was really the heart of bringing this population into the project.
Yeah, it takes a lot of it took a lot of recruitment, I guess. And so going around the community trying to tell kind of almost a sales pitch in a sense, like, hey, do you want to participate in the study? Because people don't people are some people are engaged more than others, and so trying to find a certain number, 26 people is actually harder than you think to get. So and then we also, like, as I mentioned, a rare community, and so our reservation is bisected in a sense. So we have the upriver and downriver because we have a road that dead ends, and so we don't have a highway that goes all the way up the river. You kind of got to go like 2 hours around the mountain to get upriver. And so we have two separate kind of communities, and so that was interesting. And we're starting to see different. We'll see what results are, but we do have kind of distinct populations. And so, but as I was mentioning about outreach, it's really essential to work with the community that you have or that you're working with to make sure that you have an appropriate representation. It's pretty easy. You can almost, I mean, especially like, you can easily spot someone who wrote something worded differently or visualized differently. And so even just like throwing like our tribal logo or our tribal basket designs on outreach material just like piques people's interest. So as people are like, scanning through information, as we have so much information in our world today, seeing that basket design, people are like, hey, what's this? And then they pay attention and then they may read more or not. And so having those little details really matter. And then wording, like I always joke around, there's always like one thing in our community, we have a community called Witchpeck. And so it's actually a Yurok word called Witchpoos, but the people, outsiders always call it Witch-a-peck. And it's always this like indicator, you can tell who's local and who's not local by the way they phrase Witchpeck. But just those subtleties are essential to get buy-in from your community. And that takes that participation from the community itself to know those differences. And so, and then Tamara, she's done an excellent job in doing all the outreach materials. Has been very flexible and respectful and open-minded. She comes up with the ideas and then we give her feedback, and she's never insulted by anything or always amenable to changing things. Very respectful, and having that respect is really essential, I think.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe. So Joe was mentioning how they've reached out in the community. People did a sort of an intake survey, and then people wore the wristbands and kept a log. And the data on the participants in the logs was processed by the tribe, by the environmental department. I think this is really unique in this project. A lot of times things just come straight back to the university. But in this partnership, they were processed by our partners at Whitehead, and then the wristbands went to the lab for analysis. And then collaborators at Whitehead de-identified the daily log information and shared that with us so that we can match it to the wristbands to correlate activities with analysis. But I really love that partnership and sharing of the duties on the project. So this has been a couple years project. Everything takes a little longer, I think, than you plan. But this is sort of our pathway to get to this point, from design, recruitment, distributing the wristbands, analyzing the samples, getting out the gift cards for the first round, preparing for the second round. I should also say we also had controls in little sort of bird houses at the upriver and downriver locations, so that there were wristbands sort of absorbing what was in the surrounding environment, not on people's wrists. And we are still working on the analysis and preparing to return results. I thought we might spend a couple minutes, both Joe and I, talking a little bit about this slide. So this shows our different roles and responsibilities on the UC Davis and Yurok Tribe Environmental Department sides. So you can see that we collectively, drafted project documents and began outreach, but it was really Yurok Tribe Environmental Department that was out in the community talking with people, as Joe was saying, like those nuances of communication and relationships. Whitehead also trained people in how to wear the wristbands and keep track of their activities. And we in turn provided training on the protocol for the wristbands. We're analyzing the samples, et cetera. You can see this overlay. But again, I think it's just really powerful the way some of the information just lives with Whitehead and never comes to campus.
Yeah, and I think partly too, being such small communities, when you're dealing with anything related to health, that's always a concern, because you may have one, young female in a community, and if they're the one that has some health problem or exposure, it's pretty apparent who that may be. You may not say who that is. So nevertheless, it's anonymized or whatever, that we kept it confidential within ourselves. And so very few people know who actually participated and what the results may be. So that's all within the tribe. We keep that confidential. I'm not like a medical person normally, but trying to follow privacy and just it's just basic respect for people. So as I often talk with academics, and there's a lot of mistrust in people. Tribal communities often have a negative perception of academics, whether that's sadly that's often the case. And so there are many tribes who have had previous negative experiences, I guess I could say. Like one prime example is always like I haven't met anybody from the Wallapai tribe in Great is that Grand Canyon, but I've heard many stories about them. And if you haven't heard of that story, it's like, I guess, the poster of like what not to do. And so it was like a genetic sampling, or it was a genetic test where tribal members had volunteered to participate in some study, and then some it came to the university started using it for all kinds of other things, and it got way out of the control of the tribe, and people started using their genetic information for things they did not want it to be done. And it was a prime example of what not to do. So with that in mind, you have to keep that in mind. If you're going to study a tribe, you don't study a tribe, you study with the tribe. So it's a relationship. It takes time to build that up. And it may not always be fruitful. You may hear no a number of times before someone finally gives you a chance. And so but yeah, we've had a number of roles, and it's been fluid in a sense. And also too, one thing in here is collaborating with the lab. Dr. Tom Young, his lab has been really great. I mean, I didn't realize how much data they would get, but it's just like mountains and mountains and mountains of data, and they have to tease out all of that data and stuff. And so it takes a back and forth as well as reshaping and refocusing to the community's interests, because you're getting so much information. We kind of got to steer it in what the community's concerns are, because there may be a bunch of other stuff out there, but we have to focus in on what the community's main concern was when we started the study. And as I mentioned before, we have this legacy, history of herbicide spraying on the reservation.
No, I'm glad you brought that up though, in terms of the exchange with the lab. So that's what we've really been doing lately, is having monthly calls. And initially there was sharing from the lab of all these different chemicals and contaminants that were hits on the wristbands. And some of them were personal care products, for example. Sometimes we don't think about how much we're exposed to from lotions or soaps, etc. But that really wasn't the primary interest. And the meetings with Joe and Whitehead staff have been terrific for, pointing the researchers to in the lab to what do we most want to learn about. And we cross-compared with databases from the EPA and other sources, which talk about the contaminants' health impact, the contaminants' environmental impact. So we really narrowed down to certain health impacts that people were concerned about, and also impacts on fisheries and waterways that people were concerned about. And so we have a specific smaller list of chemicals. We got standards to ensure that those were the chemicals we were hitting on the wristbands. And now we're preparing the report back. And this is a sample from Tamara's work to organize the report back. And this is what will show on here: the name of the chemical, the identity of the wristband, the average across the wristbands, the summer and winter values, the health concerns, the environmental impacts, any interesting observations we noted, differences between the groups and the sample times, where the chemical or contaminant might be found, common products, for example, such as like cleaning or pets to get rid of ticks and fleas. Those are some sources. And then mitigate, how to reduce exposure, or if you're exposed, how to minimize impact. So that's what's going to be on the report back.
And then also, I was going to add, Tamara had some really great, this is still a draft. We're still getting to the end of it, but it's still a work in progress. But one example was just showing like what's a common, whatever it may be. She had a picture of a product that it may have typically, it's like I said, it's a package. So this is just one part of it, but that was really helpful too. Just having that little visualization of like, you're talking to a person who's not normally thinking about this type of information. And so you kind of got to make it something that's easily understood for them and that would grab their attention in a sense. And so I think that's good. Thanks.
Yes, definitely, especially with these very long compound names. Just an image of where you might find this, how you might be exposed. So again, we went through the data collection already. We're finishing the sample analysis, confirming the chemicals, and now developing the individual result reports, meeting regularly to go over those. They will have the chemicals identified, sources, and health effects. And then our first real strong near-term goal is completing these individual report backs. Then we'll collate the information to give back to the tribe with kind of an overview. And that's all we have. So we look forward to conversation. I know this has been a really important project for both of us to be part of. So we're glad to be able to share it with you.
And I was just going to add one thing about it's been really helpful having Tamara's assistance because she's taken the lead and especially in tribes we're always all working, but tribes especially, we're have multiple hats that we're doing and we're juggling multiple projects. We really are understaffed and overworked, and so having Tamara's help to take the lead on these and actually do the work, and then all I have to do is edit the things that she's doing instead of me having to write it all, is really helpful. And so if you're going to collaborate with the tribe, I just recommend just recognize that the few people that you probably are able to work with, they are juggling multiple projects. They may have multiple projects with other researchers as well beyond yourself. And so just keep that in mind that tribes especially juggle a lot of projects at one specific time. And then one other thing with Beth Rose is that she's always been really, really respectful, but also it's really helpful too that she always says like, how can I contribute something to your tribe? How can I help? So she always has offers, funding or assistance, or, she says, hey, my institution has resources. How can I open those up to you to help? And so she's always reciprocal. She always gives back instead of just take. And so often that can add up. Sometimes I have some researchers that I may work with on something and, hey, I get an email all the time. Like, can you, comment on this document or this report? And then I was like, after a while, these things starts to stack up and it takes some time. And so one little ask from one person, you may not think it's much, but I may be getting 10 emails from 10 people saying that one ask. So my point being is that Beth Rose has always been giving with her relationship as well. And so that's very, very refreshing, and thank you. And she's always been really respectful to us and always really, it's been a pleasure. So.
Well, thank you both, Beth Rose and Joe. We've got a number of questions coming through. Again, for our audience, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to type in any questions you'd like to pose to Beth Rose and Joe. So I wanted to kind of go back to Beth Rose and Joe. You both mentioned Tamara's work on the project, your graduate researcher. And Beth Rose, you mentioned that she worked to develop project protocols. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on some of the considerations in terms of protocol that would shape the scope or the processes. And also, how are the key decisions related to the research made together?
Sure. Well, one, I think, real benefit of this project was that it was requested by Yurok Tribe Environmental Department staff. So we didn't come and say, hey, we want to learn about your exposure levels. It really came from people in the community. Like, we want to know our exposure levels. And then our partners on campus in the labs, we had already been working with them. Tom Young had already been up to Yurok Tribe a couple times at least with the Superfund project and met with tribal members, heard from basket weavers, heard from community members in a very impactful way about cancers in the community. We even lost one of our advisory committee members, very sadly, to cancer during that Superfund project. So he felt the impact and the importance of this work. And for the lab too, they're using different methods, gas and liquid chromatography to identify what's on the wristbands. And this is not. These processes are kind of expensive and hard to access. So it was a really nice partnership in that we already had some relationship in place. So for the protocols, of course we did the IRB, but the IRB is important, but it's not, I think, as stringent as the process of being in dialogue with the tribe about where the data lives, who it's for, how it's kept, how it's shared, when it's shared. So we talked about all of those aspects. It was a lot of conversation back and forth about even the upriver, downriver, the gender dimension of the research, what to look for and focus on the wristbands. All of that has just been a series of dialogues. I think another important protocol is that we're not presenting any results to you today, for example, about what's on the wristbands, because that needs to go to the participants first. It needs to go to the tribe first before any of it gets shared out further than that. So that's just some comment on that.
Yeah, I think the big thing is just data sovereignty. That's a really emergent field. And just having Beth Rose being really cognizant of that and being very, very very aware of it and being on point all the time. Like we haven't luckily had any issues that I'm aware of with the university requesting information that maybe the tribe wouldn't want to share anyway. But I know that she always has our back in that she's guarding our data in that way. And so we do have things that can be shared, but there are some things that are not shareable. And so I think that's the big thing is mutual respect and dialogue. It's not a one-off like, oh, we saw you, months ago or whatever. It's like we continually have regular calls all the time. And so I think it's having that relationship and building that trust with each other is really, really important. And that takes time. It's not something that just happens right away. So, but I think that was the biggest thing, was just the relationship and having trust.
Thank you. And Joe and Beth Rose, you've both talked about, the long-standing nature of this relationship. But were there any barriers that you encountered that you didn't expect or that surprised you with regard to collaboration? And how did you overcome those as they came up?
I'm kind of late to it myself. Like I said, this grant started a few years before I even started working on it myself. And I was in the department, but not working on the project. So I would peripherally hear from my coworker working on it. And I don't remember hearing anything major. Um, One of our thing, COVID threw a curveball at everybody's stuff. But also too, just working with the lab, that's been, a learning process for me, how much work they have and how long it takes for them to analyze other things. And so, that's been, a process. And so having patience and have flexibility and know that, hey, this is going to pay off. We just got to, work a little bit longer than we expected, but hey, understand they have a lot of work they're doing. I mean, it's crazy. I didn't understand how much chemicals we put on ourselves. And so, um, that that's just one example, but I hope that answers.
Yeah, I think time is one challenge. I think initially this project maybe was funded for, was it 1 year or 2 years? But we're definitely at, wrapping up year two, pushing three. It just, things take a lot longer. COVID's part of it, but it just takes time to develop the processes. Everyone feels comfortable to figure out just the logistics of getting the wristbands out, getting them back, like doing the analysis. Things happen in the lab, machines break down. So things take longer than you expect. Luckily, the funders has been flexible and extended our time, which is great. Payments, moving money, I think, from the university to the tribe on both Superfund and to a lesser extent on wristband, because we ironed out some issues. It's a significant challenge that I think there's a lot of discussion about at universities, just sort of the clunky nature of engaging in a contract, particularly with the tribal government, and moving the funds in a timely manner. Just some logistical challenges on the back end. And then some expectations, I think, in the research process. So, for example, with the Superfund project, the way it was scaffolded, to my understanding, was that through the sampling of the water and the sediments at the mill processing sites, that we would arrive at specific chemicals that would pop up at higher levels than others, and that would, be having effect on living tissue through the immunoassay and bioassay studies. But what happened was that we had more of a low level of a variety of chemicals rather than one particular one. And having one particular one would have triggered more processes, such as engineering what we envisioned as kind of a little dipstick that you could dip in the water and see if the chemical was present. But because we didn't find one at a very high level, which is a good thing for exposure, it just didn't trigger these other steps in the process for the research. So that kind of, I think, created a little bit of confusion among the research teams on campus, because Superfund was a huge project with many different teams with different roles. Whereas wristband, I like, because it's more specific and focused. It's us, the lab, Native American Studies, Environmental Engineering, Yurok Tribe Environmental Department in dialogue on one project, which is a little easier to manage.
I'm seeing a lot of admiration, I guess, in the comments around, how you've protected this data sovereignty. And wondering, does UC Davis as an institution have a policy related to data sovereignty for these types of projects? And maybe more broadly, are there, any other things that universities can do to support these types of collaborative research projects and the relationships that make them a success?
I think that's a great question. And now I wrote it down. Do we have a data sovereignty policy? We should. I'm going to ask my colleague Michelle Villegas Fraser, who is going to be in a high level role regarding tribal relations. That's really important. We should have one at UC and maybe even system wide. So I'll look into that. In terms of support, I think the flexibility on time is important because these projects take time, and also diversity of support for both researchers on campus to be able to focus on the analysis and to be able to bring on really great GSRs like Tamara, and also support in the community for all the different roles that YTED is playing, support for the participants participating in the project. It's really, I think, a different type of research project that's much more long-term relationship based and requires a diversity of support and flexibility in time.
And if I could add, on the tribes end, we don't really have our own IRB. And so we just kind of, our IRB ourselves is just talking with our elders for the most part. And so the only way we protect our data is through contracting, because that's one legal hook that we have. And so often we sometimes we have these obscure projects that we have to fit into a contract just because of that legal protection to make sure that we have that data protection, basically data sovereignty. But what's shareable, what's not shareable, what will be deliverable, what's retains in the tribe. And so that's one way the best way that we've figured out is contracting on the tribe's end anyway. But yeah, in academics, I mean, it's still, somewhat within the academic field, it's still fairly, it's still a new process and new idea in a sense of data sovereignty. So I don't know any great examples of like, yeah, that's exactly what everybody should do. It's still evolving, but definitely needed.
So one of the things you mentioned when we kicked off the webinar today was this kind of 20-year time frame where your tribe's been advocating to remove dams. Once you have the outcomes from this research, what are the pathways you have to affect real change?
Yeah, I wish I had a great answer. I'm just chasing the next grant, but let's see. I mean, in the community, we just want to be healthy. We want to have, our connections to our landscapes the way our ancestors did, and not be sick while doing that. So, and our future generations to even have a better opportunity than what we have today. So I think in the long term is just a healthy environment, because like we're attached to our environment. So we always say, if we have a healthy environment, we have healthy people, and vice versa. If people are sick, then our environment's sick as well. And so I think in the long term, it's just working towards that goal that we have, health and all the things that come along, the positive things that come along with that as well. I hope that answers your.
Absolutely. And Beth Rose, building on that question a little bit, I mean, you have some focus on activism as well in your research portfolio. What is your experience at UC Davis in terms of the faculty incentive systems that allow you to kind of translate this knowledge in a way that will kind of create change for the community?
That's a great question. Well, I feel really grateful to be in the Department of Native American Studies, because built into the mission of the department is, respectful collaboration, centering Indigenous knowledge systems and approaches, and doing work that's useful for people and communities. So that's built in. Whereas I think sometimes in other departments, there might be an overemphasis on perhaps like the basic science rather than its relationship to living communities and/or people's different perspectives on ways of knowing and interacting with environments. So I think being at NAS has provided a really supportive atmosphere for this type of work.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we're coming down to the last few minutes of the webinar, so I'll invite you both to share, take a minute each to share any final takeaways, key messages that you'd like to leave this audience with.
Sure. I think this project for me has been a highlight in my work because the tribe requested it, because it's such an important area of inquiry around exposure. I would really like to see changes in state and federal policy that recognize unique tribal specific, culturally specific routes of exposure and protect people in communities from contaminants that are coming from industrial uses, from things that are permitted, like even marijuana grows, things that can be permitted, but the types of chemicals that are used might be affecting different people differently and might be placed in their homelands without their consent. So I hope this research contributes to raising awareness about general levels of exposure that tribal members are facing, but also in a bigger picture contributes to addressing the unequal impacts of chemical contaminants throughout the environment, particularly as they affect tribal members and people who are subsisting off of their local environments in rural areas.
I think the biggest thing is just having, like, as Beth Rose mentioned, was having the opportunity. The tribe asked her, and I think it was because we had previous projects that we could trust her, and we valued her input, and we knew that we would get something great from it. And so here we are with the wristband studies. But I think that's just the biggest thing, is just having flexibility and open-mindedness and persistence. So I think that's the biggest thing, I guess. And I mean, as we move through, I mean, I anticipate we're always thinking of new projects to do as well. I email, hey, how about this? Nah, it doesn't work out now. Hey, might work out next year or 2 years, 3 years from now, whatever. But it's a relationship. And so once you have that, then you can go back multiple times later on. And so it takes time. And patience. And I mean, one of the things too, I saw often when I talk these presentations, people ask like, well, how can I get into contact a tribe? And so often there's no great answer to that. Each tribe is different. And so, but basically, like, I guess tribal council is usually, I always say that one of my friends, from one of the tribes, he always said that tribal council is the front door. But there's also like public events. Usually, like, most tribes have a public event of some sort that is okay for the general public to go to. I don't know. Sometimes they have powwows. Not all tribes do powwows, but something of that sort. We have our salmon festival is one thing, and it's just building that relationship, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, Beth Rose and Joe, thank you both so much for sharing your experience today. Please stay tuned for announcements of future webinars in this series. Thank you so much.